He wrote a book that many of you know of or maybe read called The Temple of Man. And what he found it was very controversial in many circles, but they call it the symbolist school of Egypt. And what he was pointing out, which I think there's a lot of validity to it, is that people thought the ancient Egyptians were really sort of primitive. Well, they had some nice art, but they had these primitive concepts of gods with animal heads, etc. And he did incredibly detailed measurements of this temple and showed that they knew concepts of harmony and proportion and phi, and he determined that, in his opinion, they had higher mathematics that they had used in building this temple. So he really sort of opened up the concept that the ancient Egyptians were much more sophisticated than anyone was giving them credit for at that time. And he also called this the Temple of Man. He thought that this temple was actually dedicated to man, and you've probably seen the diagrams because I included them in what I sent to you, how he actually took the ground plan of the temple and overlaid a human skeleton on it, and he thought he could see or perceive in the structure of the temple the different parts of the human body. Now, you know, we can argue about that one way or another, but I'm giving you the historical background. Also, it's a very strange temple because it has two different axes to it. And there's been different work of astronomical alignments and that type of thing. But it's a very interesting temple, one of the great temples. And getting back to what I was saying, it's because of Schroer de Lubitsch. John Anthony West then became a student effectively of Schroer de Lubitsch, translated his work and wrote about it in English. And it was Schroer de Lubitsch who first made the observation that the Sphinx was apparently weathered by water, not wind and sand, which is what brought me into the picture. And we'll talk about that more when we go to the Giza Plateau. So that's a little bit of background. Schwaller did, really his breakthrough, I think, was that the ancient Egyptians were as sophisticated, more sophisticated than the later Greeks and Romans. In fact, when you look at a lot of the Greco-Roman, and we've been looking at Greco-Roman influences, they came to Egypt. They learned so much from Egypt. And Schwaller really was emphasizing that, how just sophisticated they were. So that's just a little bit of background. The temple itself, Muhammad talked about more, but it spans a huge period of time. Muhammad, am I correct? Alexander the Great was here, and he added to it. You have new kingdom structures to it. It is a unified whole with Karnak that we're going to see tomorrow morning. We've got the Avenue of Sphinxes, which goes, as Muhammad already pointed out, from Luxor Temple to Karnak Temple. So this is really a huge religious complex. I mean, much larger than any religious complex anywhere else in the world, larger than the Vatican when you start putting it all together. I mean, it's sort of mind-boggling, but that's just a little bit of background right now. So keep that in mind as we go through it. And I think it's one of the most beautiful temples.
Yeah. All right, guys. This is great.